At 49, Natalie Wood's daughter Natasha Gregson Wagner broke decades of silence, not with accusation but with reflection. The question that haunted Hollywood for over 40 years still echoed. What really happened that night on Catalina Island in November 1981? Natalie Wood, the luminous star of West Side Story and Rebel Without a Cause, had vanished beneath the dark waters off her yacht, Splendor. On board that night were her husband, actor Robert Wagner, her co-star Christopher Walken, and the captain, Dennis Davern. What began as a glamorous weekend retreat ended in tragedy that tabloids would chase for generations. Rumors swirled of jealousy, argument, and a scream in the night. The world wanted an answer. Wagner maintained his innocence. Investigators called it an accident, but questions lingered. Decades later, Natasha's quiet acknowledgement of her mother's legacy reopened the wound, not to accuse but to understand. Behind the scandal was a family searching for peace, and a truth that refused to sink beneath the surface. It was November 29, 1981, a cold, restless night when the Pacific seemed to hold its breath. The yacht Splendor drifted gently near Catalina Island, its deck lights glowing faintly against the dark water. On board were 4 people whose names would soon be forever bound by tragedy. Natalie Wood, radiant, complicated, and adored. Her husband, Robert Wagner, the Hollywood gentleman who'd once been her teenage dream. Christopher Walken, her co-star and friend. And Dennis Davern, the loyal captain who had watched them all from the shadows. What began as a quiet weekend escape soon became the setting for one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. The evening carried laughter, wine, and undercurrents no one could name. Witnesses later reported hearing fragments of raised voices drifting across the waves, sounds of an argument, followed by something crashing, and then silence. By morning, Natalie Wood was gone. Her body was found floating in the water, dressed in a flannel nightgown, socks, and a red down jacket. Natalie Wood's death occurred just before dawn on November 29, 1981, near Catalina Island. The Los Angeles County coroner initially ruled it an accident, death by drowning, suggesting she may have tried to secure a dinghy that had come loose from the yacht. But even in that first report, something felt wrong. There were bruises on her arms and legs that didn't align with a simple fall. There was a small abrasion on her cheek, a cut on her wrist, and fingernail marks that spoke of struggle rather than surrender. For decades, her death remained officially classified as an accident, yet the questions never stopped. How did a woman who feared dark water, who by her own friends' accounts was terrified of drowning, end up alone in the sea she dreaded most? How could no one on board have heard her fall or cry out? As the years passed, the facts themselves began to shift, like sand under tide. In 2012, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office quietly reclassified Natalie Wood's death from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. That subtle change carried a heavy implication, that the full story had never been told. It reopened wounds and whispers long buried beneath fame and grief. In 2018, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department officially named Robert Wagner a person of interest in the case, not charged but no longer untouched by suspicion. Detectives noted inconsistencies between his early statements and later accounts, details that no longer aligned with new witness testimony. It wasn't proof of guilt, but it was an acknowledgement of shadow, that something had been missed, or perhaps deliberately concealed. Through it all, Wagner maintained his innocence. He spoke of love, of loss, of that terrible night when everything beautiful shattered. But to the public, the timeline had changed from clarity to fog. The official words, drowning and other undetermined factors, became a haunting refrain. For Natasha Gregson Wagner, only 11 years old when her mother vanished, the tragedy became both personal and public. Her childhood memories were rewritten by headlines she couldn't escape. She lost not just a mother, but the truth, and for decades, silence became her only defense. Natalie Wood's final night on Earth remains suspended between fact and feeling, between what was recorded and what was felt. The sea, indifferent and endless, keeps its own counsel. But the echoes of that night, the raised voices, the unanswered questions, the sudden quiet, still ripple through time, reminding us that even legends are fragile beneath the weight of what cannot be explained. When the headlines broke that cold November morning, the world seemed to stop. Natalie Wood dead at 43, drowns off Catalina Island. The words appeared in black and white, stripped of the color and vitality she had carried through every role she played. To millions, she was the shimmering girl from West Side Story and Rebel Without a Cause, the Hollywood child who had grown up under the camera's gaze. But to Robert Wagner, she was something far more complicated, a mirror of both his success and his fragility. Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood's story was already one of Hollywood's most layered romances. They first married in 1957, divorced 6 years later, amid rumors of jealousy and distance, then remarried in 1972, determined to rewrite the ending of their own love story. By all appearances, they had two stars reborn into maturity, raising daughters, blending families, and hosting glittering parties that seemed to prove happiness could indeed survive Hollywood. But as investigators soon learned, the perfection was fragile. The night aboard the Splendor had begun in camaraderie. Drinks, laughter, the easy companionship of old friends. Yet witnesses later described a sudden shift. There was tension between Wagner and Walken, reportedly over Natalie's career and independence. According to official reports, Wagner admitted to a heated discussion that evening before realizing Natalie was missing. Those are his words, documented in police transcripts. It was Captain Dennis Davern who radioed the Coast Guard at 1:30 a.m., reporting Natalie's disappearance. Hours later, searchers found her lifeless body just a mile from the yacht. The small dinghy, the Valiant, was discovered nearby, engine off, oars floating free. The details painted a story that seemed both ordinary and impossible. A Hollywood legend, gone without witness, swallowed by the same ocean that once glittered under her fame. The official ruling of accidental drowning gave the public a tidy answer, but it did not soothe the unease. Too many questions lingered. Why had no one searched immediately? Why did Wagner wait hours before contacting authorities? Why were bruises found on Natalie's arms consistent with someone being held or restrained? For decades, the silence that followed became its own kind of narrative. Wagner retreated from public comment, choosing discretion over confrontation. Davern, on the other hand, began to speak out, first hesitantly, then with increasing conviction, claiming that the truth had been softened to protect reputations. In 2011, he publicly stated that he believed Wagner had been responsible for what happened that night. Davern's new account triggered the 2011 reopening of the case by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Detectives re-examined witness testimony, forensic evidence, and the timeline of events. In 2012, the coroner's office amended its report, officially adding undetermined factors to Natalie's cause of death. It was a small phrase, but it carried a heavy implication that what happened aboard the Splendor might never have been an accident at all. For Natasha, the daughter left behind, that silence became an inheritance. She had been 11 when her mother vanished, too young to understand the headlines, old enough to feel the hollow space they left behind. In later interviews, she would describe her childhood as split between two truths, the love she remembered and the mystery she could never quite touch. Hollywood moved on, as it always does, but the shadow of that night never left. Each documentary, each retelling, seemed to pull the story in new directions. Part tragedy, part investigation, part legend. Yet beneath the speculation lay something far more human. The image of a woman whose beauty had defined an era, and a man who could never escape the question of whether love, in its most volatile form, had turned fatal. Natalie Wood's death was no longer just a mystery. It was a mirror. reflecting not only Hollywood's obsession with perfection, but also its fear of imperfection, of truth too raw to fit the screen. For years, the Splendor became a ghost ship, its story retold in whispers, its decks immortalized in speculation. In Hollywood, where reputations are currency, Robert Wagner's once sterling image began to blur. To many, he remained the grieving widower who had lost the love of his life. To others, he was a man hiding behind charm and silence. It was this tension, between sympathy and suspicion, that would come to define the next 4 decades of his life. Records reveal that Wagner cooperated with investigators in the immediate aftermath of Natalie's death, offering his version of events multiple times. But as the years passed, inconsistencies began to surface. The first official investigation, closed in 1981, concluded accidental drowning, yet interviews with crew members, most notably Captain Dennis Davern, hinted at a more volatile truth. He described hearing raised voices, a struggle, and the sounds of movement on the deck shortly before Natalie disappeared. Forensics specialists later re-examined the autopsy in 2011, noting new details previously overlooked. Bruises on her upper arms and legs, and abrasions on her face that did not align neatly with the theory of an accidental fall. These findings reignited public curiosity and skepticism. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the case that same year, officially reclassifying the cause of death as drowning and other undetermined factors. By 2018, detectives publicly identified Wagner as a person of interest, not charged, but not cleared. That designation echoed like a verdict without conclusion, leaving the actor caught in a liminal space between memory and accountability. Wagner maintained his innocence through measured statements, expressing sorrow but declining to engage with renewed inquiries. His autobiography, Pieces of My Heart 2008, offered reflection but not revelation. He spoke of Natalie with tenderness, describing their love as enduring yet sidestepped the questions that continued to haunt their story. For the public, the re-emergence of the case rekindled something deeper than curiosity. It exposed the fragility of the Hollywood myth. The image of glamour and devotion that Natalie and Robert had carefully constructed now stood in stark contrast to the evidence of fear and conflict hinted at in witness statements. The facade of the golden couple was cracked, and through those fractures, a more human truth emerged, that love and destruction often walk hand in hand. Natasha Gregson Wagner, Natalie's eldest daughter, grew into adulthood beneath the weight of this unresolved grief. She has spoken sparingly about her mother's death, focusing instead on preserving her legacy through film restorations and the 2020 documentary Natalie Wood, What Remains Behind. Produced with the cooperation of the Wagner family, it offered rare glimpses into private photographs, home videos, and family letters. Yet notably, Natasha chose not to relitigate the past. Her focus was love, not blame, understanding, not accusation. In that documentary, interviews with friends and family revealed how deeply Natalie's fear of water was known, a phobia she had carried since childhood after a near-drowning incident on a film set. This single detail, her lifelong terror of dark water, became one of the case's most haunting contradictions. How could a woman so afraid of the sea willingly climb into a dinghy alone at midnight? The question lingers, suspended between fact and faith, never fully answered. For Natasha, it became less about resolving the mystery and more about restoring her mother's humanity, reclaiming her story from the noise of speculation. As time marched on, public fascination gave way to a quieter kind of mourning. Natalie Wood's legacy shifted from tragedy to resilience, from victim to icon. Her films found new audiences, her grace reframed through the lens of loss and endurance. And Robert Wagner, now in his 90s, lives under the long shadow of both love and doubt. The man who once held Hollywood's heart, now forever linked to its most enduring mystery. But perhaps the real truth lies not in the unanswered questions or reopened files, but in the emotional residue left behind, the ache of what was lost, and the fragile redemption found in those who choose to remember with compassion, rather than accusation. Because in the end, the story of Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner is not merely about how one life ended, but about how love, guilt, and silence can echo across generations, reshaping memory until only the heart remains. Time, with its patient cruelty, has a way of softening even the sharpest wounds. For Natasha Gregson Wagner, the daughter left behind, healing did not arrive in a single revelation, but through years of learning to live with questions that could never be fully answered. The tragedy that once defined her mother's memory slowly transformed into something else, a story reclaimed from the fog of rumor and reimagined through love. By the time Natalie Wood, What Remains Behind, premiered on HBO in 2020, Natasha had spent decades balancing the roles of daughter, mother, and keeper of a legacy. The documentary was more than remembrance, it was restoration. Within its frames, audiences saw Natalie not as a headline or mystery, but as a woman who laughed freely, parented fiercely, and loved deeply. Archival interviews and private letters painted her life not in the colors of tragedy, but of passion and artistry. Sources reveal that Natalie Wood's career spanned over 4 decades, earning 3 Academy Award nominations by the age of 25. She was a pioneer for women in film, unafraid to challenge studio executives or advocate for stronger roles. Her performances in Splendor in the Grass, West Side Story, and Rebel Without a Cause remain cultural landmarks, testaments to her range and emotional intelligence. These truths, once overshadowed by speculation, became central to Natasha's mission to restore dignity where doubt had long reigned. Robert Wagner participated in that documentary, appearing frail yet composed, his words measured, his emotions visible. His inclusion was not an exoneration, but an acknowledgement of complexity, the willingness to exist within contradiction. For Natasha, the decision to include him was an act of grace, not forgetfulness. She has spoken factually of her deep bond with the man who raised her after her mother's death, calling him Daddy Wagner, a choice that to some stirred controversy, but to her symbolized forgiveness. That quiet forgiveness became the story's most human truth. No press release or police statement could resolve what Natasha's heart already understood, that love and pain can coexist, and that understanding does not always require certainty. In later interviews, Natasha reflected that her mother's spirit lived on not in answers but in resilience, in the capacity to endure scrutiny with dignity. Her voice carried none of the bitterness that might have been expected, only the tenderness of someone who had learned that legacy is built not by how we die, but by how we live. Today, Natalie Wood's star still glimmers along Hollywood Boulevard, polished by the hands of strangers who never knew her yet feel the pull of her story. Robert Wagner, now a century old in spirit, if not yet in years, remains a living echo of that story. A man who once symbolized strength, now defined by fragility. His silence, once seen as avoidance, now feels more like reverence, the kind of quiet kept by those who have loved and lost too deeply to speak. For audiences who revisit Splendor in the Grass or West Side Story, there is a new awareness, a sense of proximity to the woman behind the legend. Her eyes, filled with longing and wisdom, now seem to look beyond the frame, toward a truth too vast for a single version to hold. And for Natasha, that truth lives on in her daughter, in every story retold, and in every moment her mother's name is spoken, not with suspicion, but with grace. The unanswered questions may remain, but so does the love, enduring, unbroken, and eternal. Because in the end, Natalie Wood's story is not defined by the night she vanished, but by the life she illuminated, a life of courage, artistry, and a love that continues to ripple through time, long after the lights have dimmed and the cameras have stopped. In the end, time gave what investigation could not: perspective. The mystery of Natalie Wood's final night remains suspended between fact and feeling, Yet the meaning of her life has outgrown the shadows that once claimed it. Through her daughter's eyes, the narrative shifted from tragedy to tribute, from unanswered questions to quiet remembrance. Natasha Gregson Wagner did not chase closure, she built peace. What endures now is not the speculation, but the light, the laughter caught on home film, the fierce devotion to her craft, the gentleness that those who knew her still recall. Natalie Wood was more than the whispers that followed her. She was proof that grace can survive even when truth remains uncertain. Robert Wagner's later years have passed in silence, marked by both devotion and distance. But in that stillness lies a kind of redemption, the acknowledgement that love in its purest form does not erase the past, it honors it, flaws and all. And so, as the waves off Catalina continue to murmur her name, Natalie's story no longer belongs to rumor. It belongs to legacy, eternal, luminous, and deeply human. For more emotional stories, check out this video.